The Prime Minister felt he faced a torrid time at the press club on Tuesday. Between being asked to name the price of basics, which he couldn't, pressed to say sorry for pandemic failures, which he wouldn't, and quizzed over leaked text messages labeling him horrible and a psycho, it's hard to disagree. This was indeed a torrid day for a Prime Minister already well behind in the polls and facing an election within 4 months. Still bruised the following morning, Scott Morrison was telling Today's Show viewers the press gallery had been pretty rough on me. It's unlikely voters will have much sympathy. The Prime Minister, like many of his predecessors, struggles with admitting mistakes and saying sorry. Whether it was the Hawaii holiday, his initial reaction to the Brittany Higgins rape allegation, or pandemic failures, Morrison's apologies rarely are swift or acknowledge personal failure. Space to play or pause, M to mute, left and right arrows to seek, up and down arrows for volume. Watch duration, 1 minute 2 seconds 1 minute and 2 seconds. The PM faces a claim that Gladys Berejiklian, senior Liberal, both slammed him in texts. "We're all terribly sorry for what this pandemic has done to the world and to this country," was as far as he would go at the press club. The Prime Minister did, however, concede 3 areas where we haven't got everything right. Amid the understandable focus on whether the PM should know the price of bread, or what Gladys Berejiklian called him, it's worth looking at these 3 mistakes nominated by Morrison and whether lessons have indeed been learned. Aged care, vaccines, too much optimism. One was the blurred interface between the aged care sector and the public hospital system when it came to the early decisions on how to deal with COVID-19 cases in nursing homes. On this, Morrison acknowledged both the states and the federal government could have done better. As a result, the 2 levels of government did put in place a better mechanism for cooperating during an aged care outbreak. That hasn't, however, fixed all the COVID problems in aged care, as the almost daily reports of a sector in crisis suggest. On the vaccine rollout, Morrison still won't cop criticism over the lack of adequate supply, but he does admit problems with the rollout. More precisely, he believes the health department wasn't up to the task and a military man should have been called in from the outset. Finally, and most significantly in terms of the future management of this pandemic, the Prime Minister concedes he was too optimistic heading into summer. He sure was. The Omicron variant was spreading fast globally, so much so that Australia paused the reopening of its international border at the end of November. And yet, the Prime Minister continued to talk about restaurants reopening, living with the virus, and a big Christmas coming for everyone. In raising those expectations about the summer, Morrison reflected, "We heightened the great sense of disappointment that people felt." This appears to be an admission of overconfidence about the trajectory of the virus. A concession by the Prime Minister that he misjudged the potential for things to get worse. If so, this is important, particularly if the lesson learned from this mistake is that COVID-19 is genuinely unpredictable, that even the best minds at the Doherty Institute can't necessarily crystal ball what might happen. It's been a horror summer, capped off with some terrible polls and a torrid press club appearance for the Prime Minister. ABC News, Adam Kennedy. So, has a lesson been learned? Will we now see less certainty and more caution from the Prime Minister about what the future holds in store? Don't bet on it. The government's path to re-election, now narrower than it was at the end of last year, relies on presenting an optimistic vision of an economy bouncing back as the threat of COVID-19 recedes. This is seen as critical to maintaining business and consumer confidence and fueling economic activity. Despite criticism from Labour, Treasurer Josh Frydenberg brought JobKeeper to an end, wound up the COVID disaster payments, and this week rejected a plea for further help from the NSW government. The Treasurer has long been the government's chief optimist when it comes to living with COVID, and has made it clear the time for additional business support is over. Philip Lowe is optimistic about Australia's economic prospects, but cautious enough to keep official rates on hold. ABC News, Matt Roberts. Reserve Bank Governor Philip Lowe, by contrast, is keeping official interest rates at emergency lows, in large part due to the uncertainty of what might happen with the virus. As Mr. Lowe told the National Press Club in his own address yesterday, we still can't be sure how the pandemic will evolve, and we can't be sure how people will respond to further outbreaks. The RBA boss is optimistic about Australia's economic prospects, but cautious enough to keep official rates exactly where they were at the depths of the crisis. As for the Morrison government's political fate, few in the coalition are overly optimistic. It's been a horror summer, capped off with some terrible polls and a torrid press club appearance for the Prime Minister. MPs are still hopeful things can turn around, but they are nervous, and the prospect of returning to Parliament next week and the unresolved internal fights over sex discrimination laws and vaccine mandates won't be filling them with joy either. David Speers is the host of Insiders, which airs on ABC TV at 9 a.m. on Sunday or on iView.